morning, Year 7. I hope you had a lovely week. This is your solutions video to the 20 questions that was set on Monday the 15th of June. Make sure your sheet says 6.3.3 in the corner. Okay, so for the first question, it asks us to do 470 times 30. So we're going to do that like this, like we always do. Okay, so we've got 470 and we've got 30. We're going to do 0 times 0 is 0, 0 times 7 is 0, and 0 times 4 is 0. So that was good. Now we're putting a 0 in the next one because we're in the tens column, so we need to fill in that one. So 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 7 is 21, but remember we mark it like this. And then 3 times 4 is 12, plus the 2 is 14, okay? So now we've just got to add those two numbers together, which is really easy because the first one is just 3 zeros. So our answer there is this number here, okay? So 141, 0, 0. So actually 14,100. Okay, so the next one is exactly the same. So we're just going to do 462 and we are timesing that by 48. Okay, so a little bit more difficult this time. So we can do 8 times 2, that's 16. You can do 8 times 6, which is 48, but we're going to add the 1 here. So we write it as 49. And then we'll do 8 times 4, which is 32, but then we have to add the 4. So we've got 36. Okay, so that's that one done. Now we're working in the tens column, so we're going to write our 0 in the units column, and we're going to do 4 times 2 is 8. We're going to do 4 times 6 is 24, so we're going to write that like this. And then we're going to do 4 times 4, which is 16, add the 2, which is 18, and we're going to write it like this. Okay, so we should have 3,696, and then we just got to add 18,480, which I'll write for you just here. Okay, so up next we've got finding the highest common factor. So we'll do this the same way we have in previous ones. So we need to find all the factor pairs for 32 and all the factor pairs for 24. So we're looking for pairs of 2 that when you multiply them, they equal that number. So for 32, as we always do, we're going to start with 1 and 32. Now it's an even number, so we can do 2. So we're going to do 2 and 16. Now next up, 3 doesn't go into it, but 4 does. Okay, so we can do 4, and what times 4 makes 32? Well, that's 8. And that's about it for number 32. Okay, so we should have those numbers as our factors of 32. Then we need to do the same thing for 24. Okay, so 24, again we would start with 1 and 24. And again it's an even number, so we can do 2 and 12 because we've just halved it. 3 goes into it, doesn't it? Okay, so we can have 3 times 8. 4 also goes into it because we can have 4 and 6. So now we need to look at both of our factors and we need to find out what's the highest number that appears in both of these sets. Well, the highest one over here and here would be 8. Okay, so that's our answer because it's the highest one that appears in both. Okay, so it's exactly the same for this one. I am not going to write down all the factors of 60 and all the factors of 80 because I don't think we'd have enough room. But remember, for 60, you'd have things like 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, etc. And for 80, you'd do the same. So you'd have 1 and 80, 2 and 40, 4 and 20, okay? So once you've written down all the factor pairs of those two numbers, you would find out that the highest number that appears in both is 20, okay? So that's the answer to that one. So the next one is adding some fractions. So this one says 5/10 plus 34/40. Now, as we've said in previous times, we don't want to times these two numbers together all the time because that might make a really, really big number. So we're going to ask ourselves first, can we get from this number to this number in a nice, easy way? What can we multiply it by? Well, we could times 10 by 4 and then we'd have 40, wouldn't we? So let's put 40 on the bottom of both of our fractions. So we're going to leave 34 out of 40 as it is. And then on this side, we've times the bottom by 4 to get 40, so we're going to do the same to the top. So 4 times 5 is 20. Okay, so now that we've got the same denominator, we can just add the top numbers. So 20 plus 34 is 54. So it would be 54 over 40. Now we're not going to leave it like that, are we? We're going to make it into a mixed number. So we ask ourselves, how many of the bottom number go into the top number? Well, only 140 fits in 54. And that means I've got another 14 left over, okay? So it would be 1 and 14 40ths. But we can even get this down, can't we? Because 14 40ths, we could half both those numbers and it would become 7 over 20. So we could actually have the answer as 1 and 7 20ths, okay? Next one then, it says 2 eighths take away 1 quarter. Now, again, we want the denominator to be the same. So how do we go about getting this 4 to become an 8? Well, we can just double it, can't we? We can times by 2. And as long as we do that for the top and the bottom, we're all good. So we'll leave 2 eighths as it is. And then we're going to make 1 quarter into eighths. So we've times the bottom tied 2, so we're going to do the same to the top. So 1 times 2 is 2. So now you know that 2 eighths take away 2 eighths, well that's 0 eighths. But we don't have to write eighths, we just get to write 0 for that one. Okay, so next up we've got some rounding to do. Okay, so this one says round 7,088 to the nearest 100. So the first thing we need to do is look in our hundreds column, which is here. Okay, so in our hundreds column we've got a 0. So either we're going to leave that as a 0 or we're going to round it up to a 1. The next number is an 8. And an 8 is 5 or above. So that means we're going to round the previous number up. So that means we're going to get 7 and then our 1 and then 0, 0. So 7,100 for that one. Okay. Next one says round 1,756 to the nearest 10. So let's look in the tens column. So that's this one. So we know that it's either going to be 1,750 or it's going to be 1,760. Now our next number, our number in the units column, is a 5 or above. So we're going to have to round the previous one up. So that puts us at 1,760. Okay? So next one, we've got 0.9 as a percentage. Okay? So in order to do this one, first things first, we are going to times it by 100 because percentages are always out of 100, aren't they? So we've got 0.9. So if we move the decimal place forward 1 and get 9, that's mean we've times by 10. But we want to move it forward again because we're timesing by 100. So that means we get 90% as our answer. Next one then says express 20% as a fraction in its lowest form. So we just said that percentages are out of 100. So we know that 20% is the same as 20 out of 100, which is how we write our fractions. But it says we want that in its lowest form. So why don't we start by halving both of them? So if we half 20, we get 10. And if we half 100, we get 50. Okay, now we could just half this again, but what we could also do is there's another number, isn't there, that goes into both of those? 10 does. So we could divide both by 10. So how many 10s go into 10? Well, just 1. And how many 10s go into 50? Well, there's 5. Okay, so that's our final answer there. The next one says, find 50% of 148. Now, 50% is exactly the same as finding a half of something. So all we've got to do is 148 halved, or we could write that as divided by 2. Okay, so 148 divided by 2 would be 74. Okay, so 74 pounds, because that's the units we're working in. That would be our answer there. Okay. Now, to find 10% of something, you just have to divide it by 10, okay? So we take our number of 3,530 and we just divide by 10. So in this case, we just move the decimal place back, so we lose that 0, and our answer is 353 pounds. Okay, so run out of time on this video, so please make sure you look at video number 2 for the solutions for questions 13 to 20.